The first thing I noticed was that he didn't look like someone who should be sitting alone. It was a stupid thought, I know. People sit alone all the time. I was literally alone myself. But something about the way he was positioned. Forearms resting on the table, coffee untouched, eyes tracking the window like he was waiting for the world to explain itself, made it feel intentional. Like solitude wasn't an accident for him. Like it was chosen. I told myself to stop staring. I was only there because my apartment felt too quiet that morning. Too heavy. One of those silences that presses against your chest instead of giving you space. So I grabbed my laptop, walked 3 blocks to the café on Juniper, and ordered the same burnt-tasting Americano I always did. That's when I saw him. He was older than me. Early 30s, maybe. Calm in a way that didn't read bored or tired, just settled. Sandy hair, short but not strict. A face that looked like it had learned patience the hard way. He wore a plain gray sweater, sleeves pushed up, and I noticed his hands before I meant to. Big, steady hands, the kind that looked like they didn't rush. I took the table across the room and tried to focus on my screen. Didn't work. Every few minutes my attention drifted back to him. Not in a horny way, at least, not at first. It was more like curiosity mixed with recognition, like seeing someone who felt familiar without knowing why. At some point, he caught me looking. Not in a dramatic way, just a brief overlap of eye contact. Long enough to register, short enough to make me look away immediately, heat crawling up my neck. Great. Now I'm that guy. I pretended to read an email, then scrolled aimlessly, then stared at my coffee like it might offer advice. When I looked up again, he was back to watching the window, like nothing had happened. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 10 minutes later, the barista called out that they were closing early. Plumbing issue. Apologies all around. Chairs scraping. Groans. Everyone packing up at once. I stood, slid my laptop into my bag, and turned at the exact same moment he did. We nearly collided. Sorry, we both said, automatically. He smiled. Not big, just enough. No worries, he added, voice low and even. My fault. Up close, he smelled faintly like soap and coffee. Clean. Familiar in a way that made my stomach tilt. Guess they're kicking us out, I said, gesturing vaguely. Looks like it. He paused. There's another place a block over, if you're still looking to sit somewhere. That surprised me, the ease of it. No weirdness, no pressure. I hesitated just long enough to feel it. Yeah, I said. That'd be good. We walked side by side without touching, the space between us comfortable but charged. He told me his name. Rowan. I told him mine. Calder. Simple exchange. No backstories yet. The second cafe was quieter. Warmer. We took a corner table this time. Conversation came easily. Too easily. Work. The city. How both of us had moved here, thinking it would fix something unnamed. He listened when I spoke. Really listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't wait for his turn. At one point, he laughed. Soft, surprised, and looked at me like he'd just realized something. What? I asked. He shook his head. Nothing. Just feels like we've been talking longer than we have. I felt it too. When we finally stood to leave, the afternoon light had shifted. Something had settled. Outside, he paused. I don't usually do this, he said, but I'm glad I did. Me too, I admitted. We exchanged numbers without ceremony, no promise, no expectation. As I walked home alone, the quiet in my apartment no longer felt heavy. It felt like space. Rowan texted first. Not immediately. Not that night. The next afternoon, when I was halfway through convincing myself the whole thing had just been a pleasant fluke, one of those brief, human moments that doesn't ask anything of you. Rowan, did you end up finding something productive to do with the rest of your day? I stared at the message longer than necessary, smiling like an idiot. Me, define productive. He replied almost right away. Rowan. Fair. Want to try again? Dinner this time. No overthinking. No weird lead-in. just an offer. I said yes before my brain could interfere. We met 2 nights later at a small Thai place, tucked between a bookstore and a closed-down yoga studio. He was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table, jacket draped over the chair beside him like he planned to stay a while. "Hey," he said, standing. "Hey," I replied, feeling suddenly aware of my posture, my hands, the way my voice sounded. Dinner was easy in a way that felt dangerous. We talked about our families this time. The stuff you usually save. He told me about a sister he rarely saw and a dad who showed affection through practical advice instead of words. I told him about my mom's voicemails that were half concern, half guilt, and how I never quite knew which part to respond to. At one point, he reached across the table without thinking and brushed a bit of rice from the back of my hand. He froze. I froze. "Sorry," he said, pulling back slightly. "It's okay," I said, and meant more than just that. Something shifted then. Not fast, not dramatic, just a quiet recalibration. Like we both acknowledged what had already been hovering between us. After dinner, we walked. No destination. Just streets. He asked if I wanted to come up to his place for a drink. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because I did. "I'm not great at casual," I said finally. He smiled, soft and understanding. "Me neither." That was all it took. His apartment was warm, uncluttered, books stacked in uneven piles. A plant that looked like it was surviving on encouragement alone. He poured us whiskey and handed me a glass without asking how I took it, like he trusted I'd adjust. We sat on opposite ends of the couch at first, talking, laughing, letting the space close naturally. When he kissed me, it wasn't rushed. It was careful, deliberate, like he was checking in with every movement. His hand rested at my waist, warm and grounding. I leaned in without thinking, feeling the quiet click of recognition settle into my chest. We didn't go further that night. Not because we couldn't, but because neither of us needed to. When I left, a little unsteady but smiling, he walked me to the door. "Calder," he said, just before I stepped out. "Yeah? I'm glad you said yes." So was I. Walking home, the city felt different. Not brighter, just clearer. Like something had finally come into focus. We didn't text constantly after that, which felt intentional instead of distant. A check-in here, a shared observation there, a picture of something mundane that somehow felt personal. His failed attempt at keeping the plant alive, my view from the fire escape at sunset. It created a rhythm that didn't demand anything, which made me trust it more. A week later, he asked if I wanted to come over again. No euphemisms. Just, "Come by if you want." I did. This time, there was less circling. We cooked together. Badly. He chopped vegetables with unnecessary precision. I stirred something I definitely oversalted. Music played low in the background, the kind you don't notice until it's gone. At one point, I leaned against the counter, watching him rinse his hands, and felt something unfamiliar bloom in my chest. Not nerves, not infatuation. Comfort. After dinner, we sat on the floor instead of the couch, backs against opposite sides of the coffee table. He told me about the last relationship he'd had, how it ended quietly, without villains, just 2 people realizing they were holding on out of habit. I told him about mine, how I'd confused intensity with connection and ignored the feeling of being alone while technically together. He listened the same way he always did. Like my words mattered before he decided what they meant. When he reached for my hand this time, there was no hesitation. His thumb traced the side of my finger, slow and grounding. It felt like being chosen without ceremony. "I'm not looking to rush," he said, eyes on our hands instead of my face. "But I am looking to be honest," I squeezed back. "Me too." That was it. No dramatic declarations, just a shared understanding settling between us. We kissed again, longer this time, still unhurried, still careful. The kind of kiss that doesn't ask where it's going because it already knows it'll get there eventually. Later, when I left, I stood outside his building longer than necessary, breathing in the quiet of the street. My phone buzzed before I even reached the corner. Rowan, text me when you're home. I did. He replied with a simple good. Nothing more. Lying in bed that night, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't replaying moments, or wondering what came next, or bracing for disappointment. I wasn't trying to control the shape of it. I was just letting it be. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. It didn't turn into a routine right away. We didn't suddenly become an every night thing. There were days between seeing each other. Sometimes 2. Sometimes 5. And instead of making me anxious, it made the moments we did share feel deliberate. Chosen. The third time I went to his place, it was raining. Not dramatic rain. Just that steady, gray kind that blurs the edges of the city and makes everything quieter. He opened the door barefoot, sleeves rolled up, looking mildly surprised to see me, like he still hadn't gotten used to the fact that I showed up when he asked. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He stepped aside, and I realized I was smiling before anything had even happened. We cooked again, but this time it went better. Less fumbling, more shared glances. At one point, he reached for the same spice jar I did, and our fingers brushed. Neither of us pulled away. We just stood there for a second longer than necessary, the moment stretching thin and warm. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," I said. "Just noticing things." He smiled at that. Not teasing, understanding. We ate on the couch this time, plates balanced between us, knees almost touching. A movie played in the background, but neither of us followed the plot. At some point, his arms settled along the back of the couch behind me, not touching, just there. An invitation without pressure. I leaned in, slowly, gave him time to adjust. His arm came down around my shoulders, solid and sure. I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding my breath. We didn't rush the kiss. It happened the same way everything with him did, naturally, like gravity finally doing its job. When his mouth met mine, it felt deeper this time. Still gentle, still careful, but charged with something that had been building quietly. His hand rested at my back, thumb moving in slow, absent circles, grounding me. I felt present in my body in a way I hadn't in a long time. Not in my head, not anticipating the next step. Just there. Eventually, we pulled back, foreheads touching. "We can stop," he said. Not as a test, as a truth. "I don't want to," I replied. "But I don't need to go fast either." "That's exactly where I am," he said, and laughed softly, like he was relieved to hear it out loud. Later, I stayed. Not in a dramatic, crossing a line way. Just stayed. We changed into borrowed clothes, shared the bed with a respectful distance that somehow felt more intimate than skin on skin. His presence was steady beside me, warm without crowding. As I lay there, listening to the rain against the window, I realized something important. This wasn't about intensity, or escape, or filling a gap. It was about choosing to remain in the quiet, in the slowness, in the uncertainty that didn't feel scary anymore. Before sleep pulled me under, I felt his hand find mine between us. A simple squeeze, no words, and I understood. This wasn't a moment I'd have to recover from. It was one I could rest inside. The first time I realized I'd started rearranging my days around him, it wasn't dramatic. It was a Tuesday. I caught myself leaving work 10 minutes earlier than usual. Not because he'd asked me to, but because I knew his neighborhood got quieter right around sunset, and I liked walking there when the streets exhaled. I didn't even text him right away. I just noticed the choice after I'd already made it. That scared me a little, not because it felt wrong, but because it felt natural. We started doing ordinary things together. Grocery shopping, folding laundry while music played from his phone balanced on the counter, sitting on opposite ends of the couch reading different books, feet brushing occasionally like punctuation. One night, while we were waiting for water to boil, he leaned back against the counter and watched me for a second too long. "What?" I asked. He shook his head. "I'm just noticing how quiet it gets when you're here," I laughed. "That's a weird compliment." "I mean it in a good way," he said. "Like the noise turns down." That landed somewhere deep. A few days later, I stayed over again. This time, there was no careful distance when we went to bed. We didn't rush. Still didn't. But we closed the space between us without discussion. His arm around my waist. My head against his chest. Breathing, syncing up slowly, like our bodies had been waiting for permission they finally got. Nothing about it felt like crossing a line. It felt like stepping into alignment. At some point in the dark, he spoke softly, like he didn't want to break whatever held us there. "I'm not good at pretending," he said. "If this is going somewhere, I want to be honest about it." I tilted my head up so I could see his face, barely lit by the streetlight outside. "Okay. I'm not seeing anyone else," he continued. "I don't want to, and I don't really want to build this with half attention." My chest tightened, not with pressure, but with recognition. "I'm not either," I said, "and I don't want half either." He nodded once, slow and thoughtful, like he was placing something fragile exactly where it belonged. No labels, no promises bigger than we could keep. Just truth, offered cleanly. Morning came quietly. Pale light, soft sounds from the street below. We lay there longer than necessary, neither of us rushing to become productive humans again. He brushed his thumb along my arm absent-mindedly, not trying to lead anywhere, just touching because I was there. "I like this," he said finally. "Us not forcing it." "Me too," I replied. "It feels steady." He smiled at that word. When I left later, he kissed me at the door, slow, familiar already, and rested his forehead against mine. "See you soon?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a hope. It felt like a plan forming quietly, in the background of everything else. Walking home, I realized something else. I wasn't bracing anymore. I was building, carefully, intentionally, something that felt like it could hold weight. And I was finally ready to let it. The first disagreement we had was small enough that I almost missed it. It happened over nothing. Plans, or rather, the lack of them. I'd assumed we were spending Saturday together. He'd assumed we weren't. No raised voices, no sharp words. Just a pause that lingered a beat too long when I said, "Oh, I thought—" "I didn't realize," he replied, brows pulling together slightly. "I should have asked." The old version of me would have brushed it off immediately, made it smaller than it felt, pretended I hadn't already adjusted my expectations around him. But something about the way he looked at me, open, waiting, made me stay with it. "I think I'm still learning where I fit," I said carefully. "With you?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, me too." We sat with that, let it exist without fixing it right away. It was uncomfortable in a quiet way, but not threatening. More like discovering a sore muscle you didn't know you'd been using. He reached for my hand then, not to smooth it over, but to anchor the moment. "I want to get better at this," he said. "At saying what I'm assuming instead of letting it sit there." That mattered more than an apology. A few weeks later, he invited me to a small gathering at his friend's place. Nothing wild. Just drinks, food, people who already knew each other well. I hesitated at first. Not because I didn't want to go, but because stepping into someone's established circle felt like another quiet threshold. "You don't have to," he said, reading my pause easily. "I want to," I replied. "I just might be awkward." He smiled. So will half of us. At the party, he didn't cling to me, but he didn't drift away either. Introduce me without qualifiers. Let conversations form naturally. Every so often, his hand would find the small of my back in passing. Not possessive, just present. At one point, while I was mid-conversation with someone I'd just met, I caught him looking at me from across the room. Not watching, exactly. Checking in. The realization hit me gently, but firmly. I wasn't being folded into his life as an accessory. I was being made space for. That night, back at his place, we lay side by side, not touching much, the way you do when you're full, not just of food, but of experience. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly. "Always," I replied. "What scares you about this?" he asked. No accusation, just curiosity. I stared at the ceiling for a long moment, then answered honestly, that I'll stop listening to myself because it feels good to be here. He turned his head toward me. "Tell me if that ever happens." "I will," I said. "Promise." He reached over then, threading his fingers through mine. A simple gesture. Steady. As sleep edged closer, I realized something else, something I hadn't named yet. This wasn't just about learning how to be with someone. It was about learning how not to disappear inside it. And with him, for the first time, that felt possible. Not because it was perfect, but because it was being built with the lights on. The shift didn't happen all at once. It came quietly, disguised as a regular evening. I was at Rowan's place again, sitting on the floor with my back against the couch, while he sorted through a stack of old photos he'd pulled from a drawer. Actual printed photos. Corners bent. Colors faded. The kind of thing you forget exists until someone puts it in your hands. "Don't judge," he said, handing one to me. This was a phase. I smiled despite myself. Younger him. Less settled. Same eyes. "I like seeing this," I said. "It explains things." He glanced over. "Explains what?" "Why you move the way you do," I replied. Carefully. Like you learned when not to. That landed. He sat down beside me. Knees touching this time, no hesitation. "You're perceptive," he said. Not flattered. Just honest. Later we talked, not about us directly, but close enough to feel it. About aging parents. About the quiet fear of becoming static. About the relief of not having to perform certainty anymore. The room felt smaller in a good way. Like the walls had leaned in to listen. At one point he went quiet. Not withdrawn. Thinking. "I've been meaning to tell you something," he said eventually. I didn't rush him. Just waited. "I don't feel like I'm auditioning with you," he continued. I didn't realize how much I was doing that before, trying to be the version of myself that made things easier for other people. I swallowed. And now I feel seen," he said. Not in a spotlight way, in a steady way. I shifted closer, my shoulder resting against his arm. Me too. That was the moment I understood the difference. This wasn't chemistry carrying us forward. It was choice. When I left that night, I didn't feel the usual gentle ache of separation. I felt calm, or maybe aligned, like something had quietly locked into place. Walking home, I thought about how many times I had mistaken intensity for truth, how often I chased sparks instead of structure, and how this slow, deliberate unfolding felt stronger than anything I'd rushed into before. I realized I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. I was standing in something that could hold me, even if it changed shape. Before bed, my phone buzzed. "Rowan, I like where we are." I stared at the screen, then typed back, Me too." I set the phone down and lay there, breathing evenly, not replaying anything, not bracing for loss, just letting the feeling settle. Not excitement, not fear, something quieter, something that felt like arrival. The first time Rowan said my name like it meant something permanent. We were standing in line at a hardware store. It sounds unremarkable. Fluorescent lights. A cart full of things neither of us had strong opinions about. Screws, light bulbs, a cheap doormat because his old one had finally given up. We weren't dressed up. We weren't alone. Nothing about the moment asked to be remembered. But the cashier asked, "Together or separate?" Rowan didn't even look at me when he answered. "Together," he said. Then, almost absent-mindedly, "Calder, can you grab the card?" I froze for half a second. Not because of the word itself, but because of how easily it landed, how naturally I reached into my wallet, how little my body resisted the implication. Later, as we carried the bag back to his place, I laughed about it. "So that's how it happens? Hardware store commitment?" He smiled, bumping my shoulder gently. Could have been worse. Could have been IKEA. That night, we cooked and ate and did the dishes side by side. No music, just the sound of water, plates, quiet conversation. At some point, I realized I wasn't visiting anymore. I was participating. A month later, he asked if I wanted to leave a toothbrush. Not ceremoniously. Not even directly. "You don't have to keep using mine," he said, opening a drawer in the bathroom. There's space. There it was. An invitation disguised as logistics. I didn't answer right away. Just looked at the empty spot he was pointing to. It felt bigger than it was. "Okay," I said finally. That was it. No speech, no swell of music. Just a small shift with long consequences. Weeks passed. Seasons nudged forward. We learned each other's off days and quiet tells. Learned how to disagree without retreating. Learned that comfort didn't mean stagnation. It meant trust. One night, lying in bed with the window open and the city humming below, I asked him something I hadn't planned to. "Do you ever miss how things were before?" I asked. "Before this?" He thought for a moment, then turned to face me. "No," he said gently. "I miss who I thought I had to be." I felt that settle somewhere deep. The realization came later than I expected. Not in bed. Not during a confession. But one morning, while brushing my teeth next to him, both of us half awake, shoulders touching. I caught our reflection in the mirror. Not posed. Not curated. Just there, and it hit me. I wasn't performing anymore. I wasn't waiting to be chosen or bracing to be left. I wasn't trying to prove I was easy to love. I was simply present. After that morning, nothing changed. And that was the point. We kept choosing each other in quiet ways. Groceries. Walks. Arguments resolved before bedtime. Hands finding each other without thinking. Love didn't arrive like a storm. It arrived like alignment. Like standing still long enough for something real to reach you. And when it didn't ask me to become someone else. It asked me to stay. And for the first time, I could.